This is an analysis of the poem The Lotos-Eaters by Alfred Lord Tennyson. First of all, a little bit about the author. So Alfred Lord Tennyson was born in 1809 in Somersby, Lincolnshire, the sixth of 12 children of a clergyman. He went up to Cambridge in 1827 but did not obtain a degree. He never had any occupation except that of poet. He died in 1892 and was buried in Westminster Abbey. He became quite famous during his life as a result of his published poems. His first publication in the 1830s was actually not very successful, but in around 1840 he published another set of poems which gave him high status, fame and popularity in the UK. Poems like The Lady of Shalott, In Memoriam, which was written for his friend Arthur Hallam, who died. He dedicated and devoted himself to writing poetry and did not want to do anything else. The poem The Lotos-Eaters is based on the story of Odysseus and his men on their journey back home to Ithaca, their island home. They are blown toward an island, and landing on this island, Odysseus tells a number of his men to go and search the area and inform him about the island, this mysterious island. They've never been there before. A few men go off and they discover the Lotos-Eaters. The lotus is a plant. It's a bit like a fruit, and they discover, these two men who Odysseus sends out, that when eating this fruit, it makes the person who eats it forget and not care about their troubles or worries, and no longer do the two men want to go back home to Ithaca. Instead, they want to remain on the island in this melancholy euphoria, this dreamlike trance that the lotus fruit induces. And Odysseus spots the danger, recognizes the potential pitfall of his men indulging in eating this fruit, and so he commands his men to board the ship, and they make haste. In the story by Homer, so Homer wrote Odysseus, and Alfred Lord Tennyson very much was an avid reader of myth, of King Arthur, English myths and legends and stories, and this poem, The Lotos-Eaters, is Alfred Lord Tennyson's attempt to tell the story of Odysseus's men landing ashore this strange island in which it always seems afternoon, and so this is where the poem is taking place. What I want to do in this video is go through the poem and talk a little bit about what's going on. So the poem begins. "Courage," he said, and pointed toward the land. "This mountain wave will roll us shoreward soon." So this is Odysseus seeing the island. They're on the sea, on the stormy sea. Odysseus spots the island in the distance, and he tells his men, "Courage," and he points toward the land. "This mountain wave will roll us shoreward soon." In the afternoon, they came onto a land in which it always seemed afternoon. All round the coast the languid air did swoon, breathing like one that had a weary dream. Full-faced above the valley stood the moon, and like a downward smoke the slender stream along the cliff to fall and pause and fall did seem. So they've reached this magical island, and it's very dreary, very dreamy. The languid air did swoon, breathing like one that have a weary dream. Full-faced above the valley stood the moon, and like a downward smoke the slender stream. So these are waterfalls. Along the cliff to fall and pause and fall did seem. A land of streams, some like a downward smoke, slow dropping veils of thinnest lawn did go, and some through wavering lights and shadows broke, rolling a slumberous sheet of foam below. So this is the waterfalls, the water hitting the lake or the river underneath and creating a foam, a white foam. They saw the gleaming river seaward flow from the inner land far off 3 mountain tops. So they're on the shore of this island, and in the middle of the island they can see 3 mountain tops. 3 silent pinnacles of aged snow stood sunset flushed and dewed with showery drops, upclomb the shadowy pine above the woven copse. The copse is a miniature forest, and they can see pine trees ascending up the hill of these mountains in the distance inland. The charmed sunset lingered lower down. In the red west, through mountain clefts the dale was seen far inland, and the yellow down, bordered with palm and many a winding vale. So if you imagine the Lake District, or possibly the Peak District, this is roughly what the island appears to be. Lots of vales, which are hills, streams, flowing rivers, waterfalls, the moon always in the sky, languid air. This is a very dreamy state that they appear to be in. And the way Alfred Lord Tennyson has written this poem, it does have a kind of lethargic and slow feel to it. It's kind of very slow paced and quite difficult to get through. A meadow set with slender galingale, a land where all things always seemed the same. All round about the kill with faces pale, dark faces pale against that rosy flame, the mild-eyed melancholy Lotos-Eaters came. So this is the end of the 3rd stanza. The mild-eyed melancholy Lotos-Eaters came. So these are the indigenous people of the islands who they've discovered, who they've come into contact with. These are people who live on the island eating the lotus fruits. Branches they bore of that enchanted stem, laden with flower and fruit, whereof they gave to each, but whoso did receive of them and taste, to him the gushing of the wave far away did seem to mourn and rave on alien shores, and if his fellows spake, his voice was thin as voices from the grave, and deep asleep he seemed, yet all awake, and music in his ears did his beating heart make. So they've eaten the fruits and tasted to him the gushing of the wave, and now they've entered a kind of trance-like state. Far, far away did seem to mourn and rave, so like the previous world, it's kind of faded into the distance, on alien shores, and if his fellows spake. So when people are talking to those who have eaten the lotus fruit, their voice was thin as voices from the grave, and deep asleep he seemed, yet all awake, and music in his ears his beating heart did make. So kind of hearing music, his beating hearts. They sat them down upon the yellow sands, between the sun and moon upon the shore, and sweet it was to dream of fatherland, of child and wife and slave, but evermore most weary seemed the sea, weary the oar, weary the wandering fields of barren foam, Then someone said, we will return no more. And all at once they sang, our island home is far beyond the wave. We will no longer roam. So what is happening here is that they've eaten the lotus fruit. They're now sat on the beach between the sun and moon upon the shore. And sweet it was to dream of fatherland. This is Ithaca, where they were originally trying to get to. And they start to reminisce. They start to think back of child and wife and slave, but evermore. Most weary seemed the sea. So the sea now seems really energy sapping and hostile and too difficult, too cumbersome, too much effort. Weary the oar. So these are the oars that when they're on the boat, they're using to row themselves across the sea. So weary the oar. They don't want to get back in that boat. They don't want to get onto the open sea. They don't want to have to use those oars all day long because they're stuck in this dreamy, melancholy state. Then someone once said, we will return no more. Somebody said, no, we're not going back. We're going to stay in this euphoric state. And all at once they sang, our island home is far beyond the wave. We will no longer roam. There is sweet music here that softer falls than petals from blown roses on the grass, or night dews on still waters between walls of shadowy granite in a gleaming pass. Music that gentlier on the spirit lies than tired eyelids upon tired eyes. Music that brings sweet sleep down from the blissful skies. Here are cool mosses deep, and through the moss the ivies creep, and in the stream the long-leaved flowers weep, and from the craggy ledge the poppy hangs in sleep. So they now prefer to live on this island. There is sweet music here that softer falls than petals from blown roses on the grass, or night dews on still waters between walls. Then tired eyelids upon tired eyes, music that gently on the spirit lies. So now they want to stay on the island, they don't want to go back. Why are we weighed upon with heaviness, and utterly consumed with sharp distress, while all things else have rest from weariness? All things have rest, why should we toil alone? We only toil who are the first of things, and make perpetual moan, still from one sorrow to another thrown, nor ever fold our wings, and cease from wanderings, nor steep our brows in slumber's holy balm, nor hearken what the inner spirit sings. There is no joy but calm, why should we only toil, the roof and crown of things? So now they're starting to question why they ever wanted to go back, why should they go back, what's the point, why should we toil, why should we work, why should we bother to encounter problems? We are the first of all things. What he's saying there is that humans should not have to toil all day long. They are essentially king of the jungle, as it were, the top of the tree. And so why should they have to work all day long? Why can't they just sit around and indulge themselves eating the lotus fruit? Lo, in the middle of the woods, the folded leaf is wooed from out the bud, with winds upon the branch, and there grows green and broad, and takes no care. Sun steeped at noon, and in the moon, nightly dew-fed, and turning yellow, falls and floats adown the air. Lo, sweetened with the summer lights, the full-juiced apple, waxing over mellow, drops in a silent autumn night, all its allotted length of days. The flower ripens in its place, ripens and fades and falls, and hath no toil, fast rooted in the fruitful soil. So this stanza is about the actual lotus fruit growing in the wood, falls and floats adown the air. Lo, sweetened with the summer light, the full-juiced apple, waxing over mellow, drops in a silent autumn night, all its allotted length of days. So this is about the lotus fruit. Hateful is the dark blue sky, Vaulted over the dark blue sea, death is the end of life. Ah, why should life all labour be? Why should life all labour be? In other words, why should they have to labour all day long? Why can't they just sit around eating this lotus fruit? Let us alone. Time driveth onward fast, and in a little while our lips are dumb. Let us alone. What is it that will last? All things are taken from us and become portions and parcels of the dreadful past. Let us alone. What pleasure can we have to war with evil? Is there any peace in ever climbing up the climbing wave? All things have rest and ripen toward the grave. In silence, ripen, fall and cease. Give us long rest or death, dark death or dreamful ease. So what this is saying once again is, why can't you just let us be? Just leave us alone. Why trouble us with our former lives back in Ithaca? Why can't we just be left alone to eat this lotus fruit? How sweet it were, hearing thee downward stream, with half-shut eyes, ever to seem, falling asleep in a half-dream, to dream and dream, like yonder amber lights, which will not leave the myrbush on the heights, to hear each other's whispered speech, eating the lotus day by day, to watch the crisping ripples on the beach, and tender curving lines of creamy spray, to lend our hearts and spirits wholly to the influence of mild-minded melancholy, to muse and brood and live again in memory, with those old faces of our infancy, heaped over with a mound of grass, 2 handfuls of white dust, shut in an urn of brass. Dear is the memory of our wedded lives, and dear the last embraces of our wives, and their warm tears, but all have suffered change, for surely now our household hearths are cold, our sons inherit us, our looks are strange, and we should come like ghosts to trouble joy, or else the island princes overbold have eat our substance, and the minstrel sings before them of the 10 years' war in Troy, and our great deeds as half-forgotten things. So now they're thinking to themselves, you know, if we go back to Ithaca, it's been 10 years since the war in Troy, and we've aged, our wives and children have aged. Will they remember us? Our great deeds, our triumphs in battle as half-forgotten things. We're going to appear like strangers if we return to Ithaca. So they're almost rationalising, they're almost reasoning amongst themselves why they should stay on the island, and they're kind of trying to persuade themselves that it's not worth going back out on the open seas, where they're going to have to row all day on the foamy seas, too dangerous, and if they get there, people aren't really going to care about what they did, about their journeys. So once again, they're trying to justify remaining in this dreamy state. Is there confusion in the little isle? Let what is broken so remain. The gods are hard to reconcile, 'tis hard to settle order once again. There is confusion worse than death, trouble on trouble, pain on pain, long labour unto aged breath, sore task to hearts worn out by many wars, and eyes grown dim with gazing on the pilot stars. So that last line, eyes grown dim with gazing on the pilot stars, this is about them being on the open sea, rowing, and using the stars to navigate, and becoming really tired of looking at the same sky all day long. Trouble on trouble, pain on pain, long labour unto aged breath, sore task to hearts worn out by many wars. But propped on beds of amaranth and moly, how sweet, while warm airs lull us, blowing lowly, with half-dropped eyelids still, beneath a heaven dark and holy, to watch the long light bright river drawing slowly his waters from the purple hill, to hear the dewy echoes calling from cave to cave through a thick twined vine, to watch the emerald-coloured water falling through many a woven acanthus reef divine, only to hear and see the far-off sparkling brine, only to hear was sweet stretched out beneath the pine. So now this is contrasting that horrible memory, that dreadful thought of having to go back to Ithaca and deal with all of the problems of everyday life, all the trials that everyday life involves for these men. And they're comparing it to beds of amaranth and moly. These are plants, and they're sleeping on these wonderfully comfortable beds. How sweet, while warm airs lull us, blowing lowly, beneath a heaven dark and holy, to watch the long bright river drawing slowly. The lotus blooms below the barren peak, the lotus blows by every winding creek. All day the wind breathes low with mellower tone, through every hollow cave and alley lone. Round and round the spicy down to the yellow lotus dust is blown. We have had enough of action, and of motion we rolled to starboard, rolled to larboard, when the surge was seething free, where the wallowing monster spouted his foam fountains in the sea. This is referring to a whale. So when they're on the open ocean and they're on this boat, they'll occasionally see whales, and when they're blowing the water up, this is the wallowing monster spouting his foam fountains in the sea. It's dangerous being on the ship, having to navigate choppy waters. Let us swear an oath and keep it with an equal mind, in the hollow lotus land to live and lie reclined, on the hills like gods together, careless of mankind. For they lie beside their nectar, and the bolts are hurled, far below them in the valleys, and the clouds are lightly curled, round their golden houses girdled with the gleaming world, where they smile in secret, looking over wasted lands, blight and famine, plague and earthquake, roaring deeps and fiery sands, clanging fights and flaming towns, and sinking ships and praying hands. But they smile, they find a music centred in a doleful song, steaming up a lamentation and an ancient tale of wrong. Like a tale of little meaning, though the words are strong, chanted from an ill-used race of men that cleave the soil, sow the seed, and reap the harvest with enduring toil, storing yearly little dews of wheat and wine and oil, till they perish and they suffer, some, 'tis whispered, down in hell. Suffer endless anguish, others in Elysian valleys dwell, resting weary limbs at last on beds of asphodel. Surely, surely, slumber is more sweet than toil, the shore, than labour in the deep mid-ocean, wind and wave and oar. O rest ye, brother mariners, we will not wander more. So this is the conclusion, this is the last stanza of the poem, and what is going on here is they are talking about blight and famine, plague and earthquake, roaring deeps and fiery sands, clanging fights, this is swords, battles, flaming towns, sinking ships, praying hands. Okay, they're describing almost a kind of nightmare in this blissful state from which they don't want to depart. They don't want to leave the island. Now they've consumed the lotus fruit, and they're describing the other world that's used to await them, but they no longer want to return. Yeah. Now in the actual story by Homer, Odysseus recognizes the danger of his men eating this lotus fruit, and so he quickly summons them back to the ship, and they escape. They get back on the ship and they row away, and they carry on their journey back to Ithaca. But this poem doesn't conclude like that. What I think Alfred, Lord Tennyson, has tried to achieve with this poem is the story of the men and the feeling they got when eating this lotus fruit. And it does a wonderful job, because there's really a lack of purpose which has been carefully crafted in this poem. There's a lack of direction, there's a lack of intentionality, and a lack of motivation to move toward a particular goal, in this case Ithaca. They're kind of just wallowing in this self-indulgent state of mind. And the poem does a wonderful job of conveying this. The imagery is fantastic, bright, vivid colours. Hateful is the dark blue sky, vaulted over the dark blue sea. Death is the end of life. Oh, why should life or labour be? Really lyrical, rhythmic lines, typical of Tennyson, almost a song-like structure. Half-shut eyes, ever to seem, falling asleep in a half-dream. So this is a fascinating poem. The term Lotos-Eaters has been used commonly to describe people who avoid the real world, avoid the practicalities and the everyday stuff, the problems of everyday life. A lotus eater is someone who wants to detach or removes themselves from the real world. And I think this is an interesting poem because I think it has pertinence in all times, because, you know, there's lots of different forms of escapism, and I think this poem is about people wanting to escape in a fantasy rather than confront the dangers of the open sea and of returning home, which I think is possibly a metaphor for achieving one's destiny, because it seems in the story of Odysseus that his fate, his destiny, is to return to Ithaca, and this is a distraction. This is meandering off course, and Odysseus, who is seen as a hero in the story by Homer through his willpower and his determination, you know, not to give in to the temptation of just living a life eating lotus fruit, but remaining committed to the goal of returning to Ithaca. So I find this poem absolutely fascinating, really interesting story. What do you think about this poem? Is it an interesting story? What's your interpretation of it? Does it have relevance and meaning today? Thanks for watching.